In character.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name's Jamie. I'm the Director of Operations at Women and Children First. We're so glad you're joining us for this virtual conversation between Julia Fine and Rebecca Makkai, celebrating the release of Julia's new book, The Upstairs House. We begin our virtual events as we begin our events in the store with a land acknowledgement. Please join me in taking a moment to acknowledge that the land on which the bookstore stands is the occupied, unceded territory of the Peoria, Potawatomi, Miami, and Sioux people. We encourage you to find out more about land acknowledgements and about the rightful owners of the land where you are viewing tonight's event at native-land.ca. Thank you. Our bookstore is currently closed for browsing, sadly, but you can still support us through our online store. We have a fairly robust calendar of events, even in these wild times, so we recommend that you check out our website where you can sign up for our newsletter that'll give you all of our upcoming event information. Some logistical things about Crowdcast that you might need to know. During the event, if you have a question for either of our authors, you can hit the Ask a Question button located at the bottom of your screen. You can also talk to one another, you all already are, in our chat. And then you can also buy a copy of The Upstairs House by clicking on the Buy a Book box, which is directly under Julia's face on my screen. With that housekeeping out of the way, let's turn our attention to our authors. Julia Fine is the author of What Should Be Wild, which was shortlisted for the Bram Stoker Superior First Novel Award and the Chicago Review of Books Award. She teaches writing here in Chicago, where she lives with her husband and children. Her new novel, The Upstairs House, here it is again, tells the spooky and yet eerily familiar story of Megan, who becomes a mother at the start of the novel and discovers in the early days postpartum that the ghost of Margaret Wise Brown, yes, that one, has moved into her condo building. The plot sounds absurd on the surface, but as I read it, many of the moments were achingly familiar to me as a mother, as I remembered those absurd first few weeks of motherhood and how awful and weird they really are, even though they're wonderful. She's joined in conversation by Rebecca Makkai, author of most recently The Great Believers, which was a finalist for both the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Award, and the winner of countless other prizes, including the Carnegie Medal and the Chicago Review of Books Award. Rebecca is on the MFA faculties of Sierra Nevada College and Northwestern University, and she is Artistic Director of Story Studio Chicago. I'd like to thank both of these amazing writers for joining us tonight, and I will now turn the virtual stage over to them. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeannie.
Yay. Thank you everyone so much for being here virtually. And I know there are people here who do not live in Chicago, which makes this, silver lining of pandemia, maybe. But I am so excited to be here because this book, I have been waiting for this book. I can't remember that we did that mall event together with a bunch of other authors.
December of 2018, maybe?
That is an incredible memory. I'm going to say
because it was in my sort of slew of What Should Be Wild. And so yours was 2018 too, right?
Yes.
Yes. It would have been that's why we were there.
Yeah. It was fun. We're kind of like a new bookstore, a new indie bookstore had opened in a mall, and we were all kind of just there with our books, but had a lot of time to talk rather than reading or anything. And I guess I asked Julia what her new book was about, what she was writing, and she says, well, it's about this woman who is, in the throes of postpartum, and then she's haunted by the ghost of Margaret Wise Brown. And I don't know the last time that I was that intrigued by a premise of someone just the little like one-liner. It was like, what the hell? And yes, it made sense to me on this really visceral level. So this book, you guys, this book is amazing. This book surpassed any hopes that I had for it. I was so happy. Let me ask, sorry, I'm rambling to ask a question here. You guys, you'll get to hear Julia talk very, very soon. I'll shut up. And later tonight, in a little bit, she's going to read too. But this book for me went right into this category with The Fifth Child by Doris Lessing, with The Need by Helen Phillips, of books that I think get at the heart of motherhood through the surreal. And it might be the only way to me that writing about motherhood really makes sense. But I mean, there are others, but it just, there's something really, so what the hell, like, where did this come from? Let's start there. Why Margaret Wise Brown?
So I knew fairly soon after my son was born, my first child, my son, was born in 2017. And I was the first of my close friends to have kids. And I was the first sort of my like close family members. And so I felt like I was very prepared for pregnancy and I knew what to expect, literally read the book there. But then I just had this idea of like the baby would pop. I don't even know. I just remember the night before he was born being like, I'm so ready for the next phase of this, not really understanding what the next phase would be. And so I had a lot of thoughts swirling around. As a writer, I was just noticing things. And I felt like this was like before The Need, which even that, like the baby in that I think is already one. So that postpartum, that immediate postpartum period, I felt like, okay, well, there's room in the world for a book about this. And so that was in my mind. And then my son turned out to be just a really awful sleeper. And so we sleep trained him. I say it in quotes because he still is up at the crack of dawn. My husband is like a saint and up with him every morning. Hi, Rick. So we read him the same book every night because they say, like the routine that prepares them for sleep. And I was reading Goodnight Moon night after night. And I still liked it, like 2-3 months in. And so I thought like, okay, there's something, let me read other people's thoughts on this. And so I sought out sort of essays about Goodnight Moon, sort of from a literary perspective. And then I started reading about Margaret Wise Brown, the author. And as soon as I started reading her biography, I sort of felt like I had struck gold because nobody had really been writing about her other than sort of one-off sort of internet listicles or these biographies. She hadn't really appeared in fiction. There was no biopic, and her life is just so fascinating. She she died at 42, so she was never ever sort of the old lady whispering hush that you sort of might imagine her to be.
I always thought that. I think it's her name too, the wise part. Mm-hmm. I fully, for decades,
you think of like that bunny in the nightcap. So you just don't young, like very pretty, very vivacious, glamorous woman. And she was a rabbit hunter. She was a beagler. She was part of this beagling club on Long Island. So like one of her hobbies was like killing bunnies. And well, not, you know what I mean by that.
Yes, that's what you do when you, yes.
Yeah. Had all of these really, she was very quirky, very like whimsical. And she was in this 10-year on and off again relationship with an older woman, Michael Strange, who was a socialite and a poet and an actress and sort of a dilettante in the arts, whose claim to fame is this relationship with Margaret. And also she was married to John Barrymore, John Barrymore, the actor, before she met Margaret. And so that relationship, I was fascinated by that relationship. And I felt like there was a book there just in the way that these two women, the way that they loved each other and hated each other and sort of had this career, this weird competition, even though their careers were very, very different. And they sort of goaded each other on. And it was just so fascinating to me. And so I sort of knew, okay, there's a book.
That's amazing. One of the things that you managed to do really well, that this is a risky move, but it really works, is you have these interstitial pieces of ostensibly Megan's dissertation on Margaret Wise Brown, or her, I don't know, I can't remember if the whole dissertation is Margaret Wise Brown or if it's children's literature with a focus on this, where you're able to just get in straight biography quite a lot. And then also you're actually taking us back there and showing stuff. And then also we're meeting her. So I'm so curious, that decision to kind of stick ostensibly nonfiction into a novel, which could have gone so awry. Like we can all imagine the version of that that's just deadly. How did that come about, and how did you pull that off without it being like, here's the Wikipedia entry in the middle of the...
Well, it's so funny because it actually I started writing and I was like, okay, well, these are the facts about Margaret Wise Brown and like progressive early education. So like Margaret Wise Brown was a pioneer of progressive early childhood education, particularly early childhood literature. So before this sort of school that rose up around her, or I guess not around her, but that she sort of came up in, it basically was like fairy tales or adult books, and that was what you had. And so she was part of this new school of like, well, how about books that sort of speak to kids that say, you know, fire trucks go beep, and the kind of things that we're used to for our very small children. So there's a whole movement there and a whole history there, and all of these things that I felt like you sort of had to know in order to understand some of what I was doing with Megan, the protagonist, in her dissertation, and just the way that she viewed the world. And so and then of course there was sort of the background information about Margaret, like that I knew to say, here's Margaret appearing in the hallway. But if you don't know who Margaret is, you don't really understand that. So I had the challenge of how do you get all of this exposition and sort of what could come off as super dry without saying, you know, here's the reading list of what you need to read before you read The Upstairs House. So in early drafts, I literally just had sort of lists of like, this is the information that I need. And I was trying to figure out how do I, you know, do I just have Megan give like a synopsis, a several page synopsis, but that interrupts the action, and sort of how do you do it?
A casual dialogue with the mailman where she's like, did you know?
Like Hermione going to the library to say like, oh, I found it in a book. But I didn't really know how to do it. And when I hit upon having her just have the dissertation in there, it solved so many of these problems because it allowed me to sort of very concisely get this information. It allowed me to set up who she had been before having a kid and sort of what her life had been in academia without having to show it. Like I could start the book. The book begins like with the birth of her child. And there really isn't any flashback. There's like a few sort of, she talks about memories like once or twice, but it's a pretty chronologically sort of, it progresses forward. But this let me sort of give a peek into like, she was someone who had written this. And then it also had the bonus of, you know, the Margaret Wise Brown information. And then as the book progresses and these ghosts become sort of more involved in her day-to-day life, they also become more involved in her writing and in her work. And so it offered sort of the opportunity to pose this question about sort of what it means to leave a legacy and what it means to make art, and sort of the difference between like the project of parenting and the project of creating like a long form piece, whether it's a novel or a dissertation or, you know, whatever it is that you're working on intellectually. And so it just, you know, I couldn't say exactly how I came to it, but it definitely took me a good year of sort of thinking it over before this form sort of popped into place.
And what's one of the things that's so cool about it is you like the initial pieces that you have there are sort of like unfinished dissertation chapters where you're like, yeah, she's right. And then almost get more fleshed out, but then they devolve towards the end into like, oh, that's not appropriate material for a dissertation. What? So, you know, you were able to do so much about, I mean, obviously we're all in her mind the whole time, but like her mental life as what's ostensibly her dissertation becomes more and more surreal.
Yeah, I mean, I also struggled. I knew that I needed to have sort of some Margaret without Megan. Megan's the protagonist. I knew I needed to have something of Margaret because it just, the reader needed to come up to breathe. Like when you're writing about somebody who is depressed or in sort of like this like sort of psychological state, it's so intense. It's so just like claustrophobic almost that I needed, like there just needed to be a break. Like no matter how propulsive, I think of something like Fever Dream by like Samantha Schweblin, where you're in the head the whole time. It's so propulsive, but that book is what, like 90 pages long. And there's no way you could have that book if it was longer because it's just too long to sit with somebody who's like spiraling in this terrifying way. And so I was able to sort of let the reader come up for air even as like Megan is unable to. And I think that ended up balancing out nicely.
So, and for people who don't know, it's partly that there are these dissertations, but it's partly that you're actually taking us back, like
yeah, the middle section is basically, I mean, it's sort of up to you if you want to read it just as sort of strict like historical fiction, where it's actually Margaret Wise Brown who you're sort of, it's in, third person Margaret Wise Brown, and you can decide for yourself as a reader of like, is Megan writing this, or are we actually in Margaret's head?
Yeah. So there's also, you're talking about this idea, which I love, of the idea of like the project, like what are you creating? You're creating a life, you're creating a piece of writing. I was so interested in the tug and pull with Michael Strange, this woman who really thought highly of her own poetry, which has been absolutely lost to time. And I haven't looked up what her poetry looks like. You don't include it in the book.
I mean, no, she's gonna come and
I know now. I know I'm scared of her guys. Versus, the way that she was looking down in some ways on the work of Margaret Wise Brown, who was writing what turned out to be some of the foundational texts of the 20th century. And foundational, I think, for I didn't grow up with those books, but I know, like, for my kids, Big Red Barn and all these, like, they're foundational. You look at like the play Wit, which is in so many ways it circles around the runaway bunny. That entire play, it's a play about cancer that takes the runaway bunny as like its primary source material. So you're dealing with these two women who have very different senses of what they're doing in very different ways that's perceived by the world. And what I'm thinking about in all of this is the way that not only writing for children, but writing about motherhood has been certainly sidelined. There's a lot of like patting on the head of like, oh, you wrote a domestic novel. That has happened. I wonder if we're in, hopefully, a bit of a different moment now with people's willingness to take books like this as really serious and not as, niche fiction, because they might only literally apply to 51% of the population. And I mean, in terms of women, but do you feel, did you have concerns going into this that by writing so intensely about motherhood, this book might be overlooked or dismissed in the same ways that Margaret Wise Brown's work might have been seen as less than in her own life?
Yeah, I mean, I do. I still, I have heard people already say, well, I'm not a mom, so I can't read this. And it's like, well, okay, well, you're missing the whole point of literature, but okay. But yeah, I sort of feel like what we need are people willing to lean in. What a terrible choice. But somebody to say like, okay, I'm going to embrace this. This is what the book is about. This is worthy of literature just as much as sort of the years and years of like male incontinence and pedophilia and, all of these other things where like, why did we decide that this is something important when this is, I mean, it's like a foundational part of who we are as a race, like as the human race, and so many people have this experience and it is life-changing and it is transformative. And I think there are a lot of mothers who are writing about it. And I think we've always had sort of like bad seed stories, and we've always had sort of, there's like Rosemary's Baby type things. But I think that people are feeling, I hope that, I feel like I'm sort of writing in on this zeitgeist of women. Like I think of like Megan O'Connell, who wrote And Now We Have Everything, which was it's an essay collection that came out a few years ago about basically saying like, hey, I like being a mother, but also I hate being a mother, like this is hard and awful. And I feel like that kind of made me feel, okay, like there's room to say this, and maybe not everyone's going to respond well, and maybe it's not going to be hailed as, the next like John Cheever, but also it opens the conversation. And I think that especially postpartum mental health is like we need to be having these conversations. We need to be letting women feel like, and men too, like new fathers, I think also have these experiences. They need to feel like, one, their experiences are valuable, and two, like they're worth exploring and talking about and writing about.
No kidding. Yeah. So, mental health is very hard to fictionalize, especially as someone's perceptions might skew, as they might lose touch with reality. Very hard to write well, and very hard to write in a way that isn't using them as a gimmick, right? And you've done a beautiful job of that. To what extent were you researching, talking to any mental health professionals, or reading, or?
I did a lot of research on postpartum psychosis, because it sort of is when you look at the postpartum mood disorders, it's really sort of the end of the spectrum that is the most like sensationalized, but it's not super common. I think it's like 0.1% of women, right. Which means it's not that uncommon too, because when you think about how many, women have children. So I listened to a lot of interviews with women, talking about their experiences and sort of where they were mentally. I did a lot of research on treatment, which can be it's just like more readily available. There's, because not everybody wants to share their story. So a lot of what you get in terms of, if you're looking for interviews, are people who sort of hit rock bottom, which I think in this book, I don't know. I feel like you could always go lower at the end of this book.
Low.
She goes low, but it could have been worse. But yeah, so I read a lot about treatment and sort of best practices, which then give you insight into just like what biologically is happening. And I also talked to a lot of my friends who I sort of, as a young mother, I didn't know that many women or people with children. And then I met sort of through my son, a lot of other young mothers, and some of them are super open and vulnerable and told me about their experiences with PPD and postpartum anxiety. And I sort of looked at my own experience, which is funny because I sort of was like, I think I maybe just have baby blues. And the more I think about that, the more I'm like, well, what is even baby blues? Like, what a patronizing, terrible term. Like, I think I did have probably some postpartum depression. I think a lot of people do. And we all just sort of shrug it off because that's what we're told to do. But the more I talked to other mothers about how they felt in those first few months postpartum, the more I sort of realized this is, even if sort of Megan's decisions are not universal, a lot of what she's feeling is universal. A lot of what she's feeling, even if you only feel it for, 20 seconds, as opposed to the way she feels it for an entire novel, like it still is, there's something out there where women are feeling this way. So
yeah, that's incredible. So let's talk for a second before in a minute I'm going to have you read something, hopefully. Can we talk a little bit about this is your second novel. Mm-hmm. First one was 3 years ago, right?
Three.
Yeah. This is the question that, the entire past year, any book event you've been to, people are like, so what's it like putting out a book in the middle of a pandemic? I'm not quite going to ask you that, but although you're welcome to tell us. But it came out yesterday. Congratulations. What's been going on? Are you, how do you feel right now? I was asking you a little bit kind of backstage, but I'd love to ask you again more publicly. How has the reception been so far? Do you feel like readers are understanding it? Do you feel like, are you braced for a few weeks of these conversations? Where are you? What's happening?
Yeah, I've got sort of, this week is a bit of a whirlwind in terms of events and essays coming out and things like that. I feel good. It's funny because with the first book and the first baby, I didn't know what I was doing. And then I had my second baby. She's almost 8 months old now. And so I sort of think it's funny in the same way that with the second baby, I built up these networks of support systems and other sort of women who I could talk to about what I was going through. And I feel like with this book too, I have such a really wonderful like network of writers now who have become really good friends and advocates and cheerleaders, where like obviously with What to Be Wild, I was thrilled with the reception and it was great, but I am now part of this community in a way. I got my MFA, so I had my graduate school community, but I feel like through like writing a book about motherhood and talking publicly about that, I have found so many other writers who are writing during nap time and are super supportive of this book, and just, working for Story Studio, which I realized, as Jamie read my bio, I'm core faculty. It all was before I was supposed to say that. I'm on the core faculty at Story Studio now, and so there's that community, and so it just feels, it's definitely harder. It's no fun to be in your house alone and to go to bookstores and, be in a mask sort of in the back room with like lovely, wonderful booksellers, sort of thinking about what it would be like to have everybody. Obviously, that's rough. I feel like the community that I have is just so wonderful. All of these people who've shown up to this event, it's overwhelming in a really wonderful way. And my husband ordered this really fancy book cake that we're just eating by ourselves as like breakfast, lunch, and dinner for the next special.
I love it. Well, I saw you had, I don't know if it was Instagram or Twitter or something, but you had like the cake and then your daughter, your baby daughter helping you.
I'm real hard to eat it.
So this has been interesting that you kind of had, what's the timing? You had like one baby in one book and now another baby in another book?
I got my agent right when I found out I was pregnant with my son, and we sold the book pretty quickly. It came out, the book itself came out when he was 1, but that sort of meant that it was sold before he was born.
That same timing with my first book.
Well, this is funny because my daughter, she was due in late July, and she was born in late June. And literally it was the night I sent off my, the first pass pages. So like when they give you, but for everybody else, they give you the pages, like sort of a PDF of like what the book will look like. And you read through and you find anything where you're like, oh, this formatting is weird, or actually I need to change this. I literally sent it off Saturday night, and she was born 3.5 weeks early Sunday night. She was just waiting. The timing was just wild.
This is so
a book about having a baby, where I was like thinking about it, and then all of a sudden, like there she was, and I literally was like reciting lines of this book in my head, like in the hospital with my daughter. Like,
God, this is so similar with my. So I had a kid, but my second kid, I got my agent. I think I was pregnant very soon thereafter, but we sold it when I was pregnant. Mm-hmm. The book came out when she was 1, but also it was my copy edits. So it was 1 round before that. I had a scheduled C-section, and I was like, well, I'm just going to work up until the night before we're having this baby. And everyone at Penguin was like, could you just like send it in a little? And I was like, yeah, we're good. And I sent it in that night. And I checked into the hospital at 5 a.m, knowing I was having this baby, but that is so funny. So
yeah, it was like a stress. I wonder how much of it was like a stress relief response. It was weird. They don't even know why she was early. It was a very weird, like she was totally healthy and fine, just decided she was ready. But it was, the timing was
So the baby in the book is a girl. Mm-hmm. And really most of the time that you were writing this, you had a baby boy. Mm-hmm. My guess would have been, just as a writer, that like you made it a girl so that it's different from your baby.
Oh, that was really deliberate. I needed to just like compartmentalize. I think especially the relationship, I think I was a little bit, and I still sort of am like, I don't know if you feel this way, like, oh, one day my kids are going to read my books, and this is a book too, where I feel like, okay, if I'm my son in 20 years reading this, and I'm like, hey, mom, in the same way that my mother is always like, wait, am I the mom in this? Like, no, it's fiction. But it allowed me to talk about sort of mothers and daughters in a way that I'm really interested in, it's just a different relationship than mothers and sons. So I think that was also part of having the baby be a girl.
That is so interesting. And yeah, there's a lot that, I mean, the husband is there in this book, and he's not literally the only man in the book. You got the garbage guy, and you got the father-in-law, but like, it's really female heavy. Where there's the sister who I find really compelling. There's Margaret and Michael, who are both women. There's the daughter. There's her mother. It's, I think without, in a way that I actually didn't really think about it until now. Like, obviously it's a book about motherhood, but it's also very much a book about womanhood. And I hope to God, this is the thing of like, you just, you really hope that people in the book world aren't subconsciously doing that thing where they only really take books, like, even like, oh my God, someone did that chart of like the major award winners, and it's like books by women win awards as long as the main character is a male.
Yeah.
Great. So we will hope that.
I do really feel, I mean, again, it's not, there's always that sort of like upper echelon of whatever it is, but I feel like there's enough people sort of at a certain level who are like, we want to read books about women. So I feel like, okay, I'm going after you, and it's going to be what it's going to be. And I wrote the book that I wrote. So
right. Here's the thing for me, it's like, I love this book and I want it to win awards, and it should win awards. So I'm thinking on this other level of like, damn well, people better appreciate this book.
Yeah. So far, you asked about sort of the response. Like, I had a friend who read it. My friend Katie literally read it while giving birth. Like, she was in the hospital and she was reading an arc. And I've had friends who, like another friend, my friend Rachel, read it. Actually, it was right before she gave birth. And I've had people who read it like with new babies. I don't know. I feel like it's reaching the people who sort of read it and are like, I recognize myself. I feel like it's okay to feel my feelings, and I'm not going to feel guilt about sort of something that is supernatural and common. And so that right now, that's my goal. Ask me tomorrow, and I'm like, I want to win it, but whatever.
I know.
I can't control any of it. I'm trying to just, it's a pandemic. Who knows?
No kidding. I'll tell you, I'm going to say two things. One is, I'm going to just say some random thing here, but then we're going to have you in a second, hopefully read a little bit, especially about the motherhood part.
Yeah.
And we'll talk a little bit more, but we're really eager for audience questions. So as I tell this stupid story for 1 second, and then listen to Julia read, and then tune me out again and type questions in the question box, especially because they might get lost in the chat, but there's an ask a question right down there. I was just going to say that because you were talking about your friend reading it. After my first baby was born, I was like, oh, I have this time to read because she's sleeping on my shoulder. So I'm going to read Madame Bovary, which I'd never read before. And is a weird book to read nursing a baby. And I was like, then I had my second baby and I was like, well, I should do something equivalent so that I don't feel like I messed up my relationship or whatever. So I'm like, okay, I'll read Anna Karenina because that's about equivalent. The problem being the second time, I didn't factor in that I had now had a baby and a toddler so Anna Karenina took me like 9 months at least. And I hated it because it took me so long anyway, could we get you to read a little bit to us for story time?
I would love to. So I'm just going to read, it's a little bit from chapter 2. I'm just going to read just a little tidbit. There's no real setup. Ben is the husband, Solly is the dog. So before the baby was my body getting ready for the baby, a preparation both physical, swollen ankles, leg cramps, nausea, and mental. I worried about everything. What if the fumes from the carpet cleaner in the condo next door came through the vents in our bathroom and poisoned our daughter? What if she was born with some new genetic disorder that they couldn't catch with the prenatal tests? What if the dog hated the baby and we had to get rid of the dog? What if the dog attacked the baby while we weren't looking and we had to have the dog put down, and then the neighbors got mad because they all loved Solly and they tried to kick us out of the condo association for being bad parents and bad dog parents, and who would want to live next door to those? They would understand, said Ben, when at 8 months pregnant, I played out this scenario. In the incredibly unlikely event that our dog turns vicious and attacks our newborn, I'm sure that everyone will understand why we had to get rid of her. Solly was splayed out on the floor next to the couch, and he reached down to scratch between her ears. But I don't want to get rid of Solly. Then good thing we don't have to. I feel like you're not taking me seriously. I feel like you're not being serious. My face fell, then softened. Everyone has babies, he said, which wasn't true. People have babies all the time. We're in one of the best cities in the world, and we have the best doctors. There's nothing to worry about. None of this was true. If we had stayed in New York or moved to Paris, maybe then at least some of it would be true. But after 15 years away, we'd move back to Chicago. 40 minutes from Ben's parents, 25 from mine. What are you so scared of? I don't know. But if I let myself linger, and I tried very hard not to, I did know. What scared me was the being known, the knowing. This baby would forever be bound to me. How would I hide myself from a part of myself? I knew my own mother in ways that I hoped my daughter would never know me. I pitied my own mother and never wanted to be pitied. I'd seen my mother's C-section scars and her sweat stains, knew the smell that she left in the bathroom. I'd heard her ugly laugh and seen her swear at waitstaff and watched her cry in the dark at our old kitchen table after spilling her 4th glass of wine. Motherhood was not a role I'd envied. It was not a job I wanted. But I didn't not want it either. I didn't actively push it away. We hadn't been trying for a baby. I could have hidden the news from Ben and handled everything discreetly, but I didn't. There was a piece of myself I wanted to cultivate, a version of myself I wanted to be. I could pack sack lunches and bring Gatorade to soccer practice, make trifold science fair projects and polish tiny toenails. I could set aside the dissertation that had started to bore me. Best of all, I barely had to do anything. I could choose without actively choosing. Here was my body, letting us know that we could have this thing, this future, if we wanted it. I could make something of myself, a literal second self, a second living, breathing someone who would need me. I suppose it would be nice to be needed. If I went to the clinic, I would bleed. If it was just the pill, just a needle, just a quick anesthetic, I thought I might have done it. But I didn't want to bleed. Bleeding would have been so messy, too obvious a metaphor. I was an academic, and I lived in a world of eternal incubation. Always one more semester, one more grant. To bleed would have commemorated finality, an active commitment for which I was not dispositionally prepared. So Clara was born.
I had to unmute myself. That was amazing. Imagine all, however many people who are here clapping, because I'm sure they are. Incredible. That's amazing. Do you feel like that is the kind of thing that you can only really write with experience? Like, do you think you ever could have imagined your way there before you had kids?
I think it's a hard question. I think that it would be hard to write it authentically.
Yeah.
I think that part of it is that these are a lot of the feelings that Megan feels and a lot of the things that she says are things that are sort of pretty they're taboo. You know, we're not supposed to, not necessarily in this particular, well, it's sort of, yes, to be like, I had a baby because, you know, I didn't want to go get an abortion. Like, you know, you're not supposed to say that to your kid, like, oh, the reason you were born. But it also is because I think, you know, she feels resentment, she feels fear, she feels guilt, she feels all of these things that I think that if you're someone who hasn't had a kid trying to write about it, you certainly could. You could talk to people, you could write about it. But I think the response might be different. I don't know, like if I were to read something about a mother who doesn't want to be a mother written by someone who hadn't had children, I might just sort of bristle in a way that,
Yeah.
But I don't know. I also I really want to believe that, you know, with enough care and sort of attention, as long as you're not sort of butting in and sort of writing a story that is totally sort of outside of your own experience, like you can access different, I mean, I'm not Margaret Wise Brown, so like I'm definitely making assumptions there in terms of what her life and her relationships were like. So I don't know, a long-winded way of saying I don't know.
Yeah. Well, our job always when we're doing fiction is to make these leaps, you know, to like imaginative empathy, like what would life be like way over there or just right over there? Unless you're going to write a lot.
I feel like what I did with this book is I sort of said, okay, here's some of the weird feelings that I'm feeling about motherhood that are making me super uncomfortable and making me feel like, am I a bad mother? And I thought, you know what, instead of like sitting and stewing over them, I'm just going to write a book where there's a mother who's like pushes that to the extreme, where like, okay, so I'm feeling frustrated that my baby won't stop crying. You know, what if she like just walks out of the condo, leaving the baby, you know, like what would it be like? And I think that it definitely helped me sort of see my own relationship with motherhood sort of with some perspective, but it also was an exercise in sort of empathy almost for myself, because if I can empathize and I can feel for my protagonist, and I do, I mean, I've had people be like, oh, she's so terrible, but I love her. I feel for her. And so like, if I can feel for her, then I can feel for myself having these feelings too. And all other women who sort of are going through it. So,
well, it's always fundamentally like you, especially early on, you're just, it's not that you're failing, but there's no way to succeed early. Like there's no way to feel like I'm doing a great job. It's just, you're yeah. And you're at the whims of your body and things in a way that are just we're not used to, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm going to open up the question box here, but as I do it, I'll tell you, at one point early on with our first baby, just like nursing was not going well and everything was a disaster. And I was crying and my husband was like, and she was like a week old. And my husband was like, I don't want you to think like you're a good mom. And I was like, I know I'm a good mom. I'm just a bad mammal. And I'm like full drama. Really meant it in the moment. I got over it. We have someone asking what you read as you were writing this book. And I know that some of that might be about research, but it might have also been inspiration. It might have also been escape. And of course, several years, right? So
The Turn of the Screw was a big sort of inspiration just in terms of trying to write a book without an answer. Like, is it a ghost or is it sort of a mental health issue? And I love that Henry James, because there is no answer there. It's however you want to interpret it. And so I sort of took that one, like how do you do that? And two, is that allowed? And I said, yes, it is. So I read that. I read, like we mentioned, Fever Dream was a huge inspiration just because it's such a visceral, sort of propulsive, painful depiction of motherhood. The Days of Abandonment by Elena Ferrante was one that was an inspiration, which that is by far my favorite of the Ferrante books, although I found that you sort of either gravitate toward the Neapolitan novels or this one, which they're just so different. She's brilliant. But yeah, so that was a book that's about a woman who sort of is unraveling after her husband leaves her. But I sort of looked at the way you can write something that is surreal, but at the same time feels grounded, which I think my book probably feels less grounded than that one does, but I took it as sort of an inspiration.
It feels pretty grounded. It's not like you're sitting there going, wait, what's happening? Like you know what's happening. You just don't know.
There's a part of that book where she's in her apartment and the only way she feels like she can open the doorknob is with her mouth. I don't know. I think about that all the time. It's a really good book. And then I did a lot of research. I read Michael Strange has an autobiography called Who Tells Me True that is exactly what you would expect it to be, just very like pompous and overwritten and wonderful, but also awful. And so I read some of her poetry, and then I quickly sort of was like, I don't really need to read her poetry. A lot of Margaret Wise Brown back catalog, a lot of Margaret Wise Brown's journals and letters. Leonard Weisgard, who is a scholar of sort of that period of like children's literature in general, but particularly sort of Ursula Nordstrom was one of Margaret's editors. And she also was Maurice Sendak and E.B. White and sort of that, a ton of people at that time. She was really great. She was actually at Harper and I'm at Harper. So,
oh my God.
Friends. I read, yes, Leonard Weisgard has a really wonderful biography of Margaret Wise Brown called Awakened by the Moon that gave me a lot of the foundational sort of Megan's dissertation, like theoretical ideas. And then what else did I read? I don't know. anything I could get my hands on that sort of had Margaret Wise Brown's name in it.
That's fantastic. That's so cool. Along the research lines, we have a question from Lauren here. While you were doing your research, was there anything you wanted to put in the book that didn't make it? Were there details that you learned that?
Oh, I mean, there was so much. Margaret Wise Brown was not very popular with the New York Public Library. There was a woman named Anne Carroll Moore who was she actually had begun, she's sort of the mother of like the children's library. She created the first children's reading room at the New York Public Library, because before there just hadn't been like a place for children. So it was huge, but she really, really did not like this sort of new school of children's literature. And she really, really didn't like Margaret Wise Brown. And she kept Margaret's work out of the library. And she was such a strong force that even her predecessor was like bullied into keeping Margaret's work out of the New York Public Library. But the interesting thing that I could not fit in, that I tried so hard to fit in and just couldn't fit, is Anne Carroll Moore had a wooden doll named Nicholas Knickerbocker who went everywhere with her. When you had a meeting with her, you had a meeting with Nicholas too, and you had to sit there and like acknowledge him, and like she'd invite you to dinner and he'd have a place setting and he had a little bed, and it was really weird. She wrote stories about him. And yet she felt like Margaret was too out there. But I wanted Nicholas to be in this book so badly, and it so that is
the next novel, just all about Nicholas. Oh my God.
You can like look him up, and it's wild. Where like if you wanted her to like you, you would like go to her house and be like, "Hello, Nicholas, how are you?" It's just very weird, very weird.
Wow. Because at first you were saying you went everywhere with her. I thought you meant as like an educational aid, like.
Oh no, I mean that's probably how it started, but like I don't know. I think that her like justification was like, oh well, the children will feel like it's real if I don't know, because she was very into fairy tales, sort of the other side of the coin in terms of like what you read to young children. Mm-hmm. Who knows? I don't know. Fascinating though. Somebody needs to read a book about Anne and Nicholas.
Yeah, no kidding. I'm gonna have nightmares now. That's, oh my God. So I'm gonna kind of combine two questions here. We have one question, they're both from Sarah's. One question is how unsettling it all is with the merging of motherhood and horror, mm-hmm. and how you approached writing the really frightening and disturbing scenes. And there are some that are really frightening. And then the other question being just what draws you in general. And I wonder, I think this question might've come in before we had some of this conversation, but what draws you in general to the mother-daughter birth legacy themes, because What Should Be Wild also had a lot of stuff about mother-daughter legacy. So maybe you answer this separately, but sort of,
this was a book where I feel so gross saying this, because if I were to ask someone a craft question and they said this, I'd be very frustrated, but it was a very like visceral book for me, where I sort of felt I intuitively knew what the structure, not the structure in terms of the dissertation, but just like sort of the arc of the main story would be. And I knew sort of how it needed to end pretty early on. And so it was a matter then of like ramping up tension. And so I think I was able to, like I said before, view this as like, oh, this isn't me. This is an extreme version of sort of what I think are common feelings. And so that sort of divorced it from my own personal experience writing the darker parts. And then also just sort of the knowledge of like the shape of this book has to be this way. And so this is what it needs right here. So I think that helped with my first book. It was a lot more sort of like, oh, maybe I could do this, maybe I could do that. And this one I sort of knew right away, like, this is what this book is. And then the mother-daughter, I don't know. It's funny. Like I said, my mom is sort of always like, well, why are you writing these terrible mothers? Like I have a great relationship with my own mom. She's wonderful. But I think I'm interested in sort of looking at mother-daughter sort of on a more like macro scale of just like women who came before the women who live today, sort of like the mothers to us all, you know. Obviously the single mother-daughter relationship is an aspect of that, but I'm interested in the way women's roles have changed over time and the way that women are socialized to behave certain ways or to prioritize certain things. And I think that it's being able to look at sort of cyclical, just like cyclical growth and cyclical changes in the way that sort of things repeat, but then with a difference. And it's sort of like an evolutionary, this was something actually my editor with What Should Be Wild, there was a part where we were talking about evolution. She's like, well, really what you're looking at is sort of like the way evolution works, where it's like the same, and then suddenly somebody adapts and it sort of springs off, you know? And I think that obviously that's like a biological thing, but I also feel like sort of socially that's the way things are going. And now that I have a daughter, it's especially interesting to sort of, I'm not at a point yet where her experience is any different than my son's, but there will come a time where she will be sort of a woman in the world, and like what will it look like, and what will sort of the legacy that we've given her be. And so I'm just very interested in that.
Yeah, oh, it's fantastic. I like this question there's a question from Toya here saying, what are some of the things you love about being a novelist?
Oh,
I like that.
About being a novelist. This is really fun. Able to be in conversation with you here. I like novels. I find myself drawn to novels over short stories generally, because I like being able to sort of riff on a theme for several hundred pages. And definitely both of my books, I start with sort of an idea of like an idea that I'm interested in, and sort of a philosophy or sort of a state of like a mental state that I want to explore. And then how can I sort of work a plot around that? And so it feels like a really interesting way to sort of be a philosopher without having to study philosophy. Yeah. And then I also love the ability to sort of follow characters over a long period of time.
I like that. It's funny. I think that all the different things that I wanted to be as a kid, I'm managing to be as a writer. Like, you know, there's I never wanted to be a philosopher, but you're a philosopher. I wanted to be a historian. And it's like, yeah.
Oh, I wanted to be an actress. And so this is the best I can do. I think there's a lot of us who are writers who are like, well, we couldn't cut it on the stage, but like we can do it.
I think it's more, I think that there are a lot of similarities between acting and writing.
Oh yeah. Yeah. The other thing that's great about being a novelist or just being a writer in general is to be like, hey, I'm really interested in Margaret Wise Brown. Let's see if I can spend 4 years working on this about her and have people take it seriously and have that be my job for a while. Like,
yeah. Right, because you can't you can't graduate from college and be like, you know what, I'm going to be a Margaret Wise Brown expert. Like that. I mean, I guess you could be a literary, but
you're in academia, which.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then like, oh well, what should my next book be about? What am I really interested in right now?
That's right. Fun. Yeah, I've heard the writer Alexander Chee tell people that they should really think hard about what they Google, like what.
Oh yeah.
You know, not the like, you know, checking my email or like escape whatever, but like what clickbait works on you.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, then you figure out why, and it's like, well, why? Okay, so maybe it's celebrities, but like, what about celebrities, and which celebrities, and why, and what kinds of stories, and like that maybe is what you should be writing about. So, yeah, I like that here. So Christina is asking a question that I was going to ask you anyway, which is about your next book. I'm assuming, is it underway? Are you?
You know, I felt like I had some momentum a year ago, and then the pandemic hit, and my son was no longer in school, and I had a baby, and sort of all of this. But I think I'm ready to say, I don't know, it's weird. So I'm interested. I'm right now working in the very, very early stages of a book about Vivaldi's Venice, and he was a teacher at
school,
like
right?
An orphanage, basically, of like these young female musicians, and so a book about that like Knowing Me will also incorporate some sort of like weird water creature / it's like Venice in the early 1700s.
Yes.
If I can physically go there, I feel like maybe it'll, you know,
that's
don't hold me to it, but that is sort of the goal. And after all of the publicity for the upstairs house is done, that's going to be sort of my.
Oh my God, that's so cool. So, that sounds amazing. Bah. And I mean, I'm assuming it's all like, you kind of plunged back into the world of this novel for the next few weeks at least.
Mm-hmm.
But then hopefully that's the rest that, get back into
it is. I'm hoping it corresponds with my, with childcare and vaccines and just like having time in a way that I really have not had time this year. I think everyone says like, oh, well, what's the right age? Like, are your kids a good age to be going through 2020, 2021? And like, I think the answer is like, none of them are.
No.
One of the things that you lose with having kids who are like super small, who need snacks every 5 minutes, is it's just very, very hard to find that time and the space. But hopeful, it feels the sun has been out in Chicago, which just makes me feel like maybe we're getting there. So
if we can get to summer, and I'm under no illusions. It's like, this is totally fall spring, but I'll take it.
But for my lunch, that's, they just, the skies have cleared. So
yes. No, it helps so much. I feel like, like a totally different human. And here's Jamie, perfectly right on cue. I was just going to say, I really want to remind people that, buy the book now. Don't wait. Buy it tonight from Women and Children First. They're the ones who have made this happen. It's a brilliant book. If you are an audiobook person, make sure you're buying your books through Libro FM, because you can link that directly to an indie bookstore. So your money is still going to Women and Children First. It's a better app than Audible by a lot. They're amazing. And I understand that someone in the comments was saying the audiobook is great. So if you're going to do it, just download Libro FM. It's really easy. It's like libro.fm. Physical book, click down there and support Women and Children First. And it matters so much. What's that?
I think there are signed copies at Women and Children First.
Yes, that's right. They're signed. And it matters so much to an author, the number of sales in the first week that a book is out versus the trickle later. That groundswell is huge. And telling people about the book, which is really easy to proselytize about once you've read it. So we're all going to be doing that.
Absolutely. You just did half my job for me, Rebecca. I just wanted to say that while you were talking, I was like, I did it. I told my husband while I was reading the book, I was like, this is very turn of the screw. So you did it. You got that. And then the last thing I wanted to say was this morning I was talking to my staff about the book, and I was just talking about how when I was in the first couple of weeks of postpartum, I always tell people, like, have a pillow so that you throw the pillow and not your baby. And I think that and my staff who don't have kids, they were all just like, what? And I was like, no, this book really does explore those feelings in a further direction than what I experienced, but really like narrows down what that experience is. And it's really a remarkable book. And I hope that you all take a chance and read it. We have actual signed copies. A lot of books these days are just book plates, but Julia actually came and signed the physical book. So please buy the book if you are able to. And thank you so much for coming out tonight. I mean, you didn't come out, but like, doing in your bedroom. And thanks so much. I'm going to end the recording, but everybody go buy the book. Thank you so very much. Have a good night.